Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Sikanda. I am a policy analyst here at the OFA, and I deal with a lot of farm labor and safety issues. I'm coming to you today from the London Farm Show, coming to you from my car from the London Farm Show, as there really isn't a quiet place there to hang out and take in this webinar. But welcome, everyone, to getting started hiring students for farm jobs. Obviously, farm safety is an extremely important topic for us here at the OFA, and also ensuring that new and young workers on the farm have a good experience and are able to contribute to solving some of the labor problems on farms. In this webinar, we're going to go over some of the legal, safety, and regulatory requirements for bringing new and students on new and young workers and students onto the farm. Without any delay, I think we'll jump right into it. With us today is Jennifer Wright from the Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council, and Dean Anderson, formerly from Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. And to start things off, welcome, Jennifer. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So I'm Jen Wright. I'm the Executive Director with the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council. I grew up on a farm in southwestern Ontario down by Dresden. My mom and dad also had farm equipment dealership, and I made, once I got to university, I realized how lucky I was to make all my city friends jealous with all the work that I had as a kid growing up and working in different farm situations for my mom and dad, as well as for other producers and agribusinesses in our area. So really looking forward to this topic today. If you're not familiar with who we are, we're a national nonprofit organization. We work on anything related to HR and workforce development for agriculture businesses across Canada. Everything we do is industry-led. We're very pleased that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture is a member organization of ours and sits on our board, and also a really valued partner of ours as well. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit more about our organization, the vision really is to work with agriculture and ensure that we're helping address some of the chronic labor shortages, really identifying the skills that are required now in the future, and working with all the stakeholders to ensure we have the workforce we need now and looking forward into the future as well. In our mission, you'll see we do a lot of research to get that real understanding of what the labor market looks like and where the skill trends are changing, the demographic changes that we see in our population and that kind of thing as well. And that mandate, again, is really to focus on labor market information and ensuring that agriculture businesses and producers across Canada have what the support they need for the workforces that they have in their operations. Next slide. So I'm going to kick things off, and I'm going to provide a little bit of information around the legal side of hiring students and younger people on the farm, and then Dean will follow up with some more details around the safety side of things. Next slide. So why hire students? Especially when we're talking about high school students, we get this question a lot. I know I happen to live in the city now, but I have two kids, especially my son, who desperately wants to work on farm and through high school, really would have loved that opportunity. We couldn't get him always there, so before he was driving and that kind of thing. But I think there's a real opportunity to get students and high school students specifically involved in your operations, especially during the summer where many operations have more labor needs. We know that that agriculture does have a labor shortage, and connecting with kids while they're in high school, getting them connected with industry, getting them starting to develop some skills, I think is a real great opportunity. Students can also provide a bit more flexibility through those peak seasons, especially in summer. Some students are available to work year-round as well if you need that, depending on what you need in your operation. And it can connect in with your community, getting youth connected with your work, and just understanding what's available in farming. Next slide. But there are some things to consider, and just like hiring any employee on your farm, you do have to make sure that you're looking at having the best HR management practices in place, and that you're fully aware of your legal considerations when you're hiring students and when you're hiring anyone for that matter. There's lots of great information available through the ESA resources on ontario.ca. We also have an Agra HR toolkit, which provides you all the tools and resources that you need to support your HR management needs in this way as well. But you do need to make sure that you're familiar um, with the Employment Standards Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act, and your workers' compensation coverage as well. Next slide. So, one thing to consider when you're looking at hiring students is that there is a minimum age for agriculture work in Ontario. So, if you're looking at hiring students that are 14 years old, between 14 and 16, those students are available to work in non-hazardous farm work. So that means like hand harvesting crops, planting, sorting, and general maintenance. Once they turn 16, they are able to work in what's categorized as more hazardous work, such as operating heavy machinery, handling livestock, and working with pesticides. There are exceptions, of course. Family-owned farms where the student is a family member may have different rules. So again, you want to be familiar with the Employment Standards Act and what there might be different for the student that may be part of your family as well. And then working in greenhouses may have additional safety restrictions as well. And again, Dean will talk a little bit more on the safety side once his presentation begins. Next slide. Other things to note is that there are some work restrictions around hours for students that are under 18. So if you're hiring a high school student, not someone that's not quite into that post-secondary school yet and is under 18, they cannot work during school hours if they're enrolled in secondary school. So, you know, if you're looking to have students work into September, October, or help in May to June, it would have to be outside of school hours. So that's something to consider. They also can't work more than 48 hours per week without written permission. And like many of your employees, they do need to have at least a 30-minute break every 5 consecutive hours of work. Again, on the safety side, I'll leave that a lot of that to Dean, but like all your employees, they do have to have that proper safety training, especially before working with in hazardous tasks, and they do need to have protective gear, again, like any employee that you would have on your farm. Next slide. Students also have rights like any employee, and so you do need to make sure that you're looking at things like ensuring that you're paying the minimum wage standards, and you can be familiar with those through ontario.ca as well. There are different minimum wage standards for various ages. So you know, the minimum wage for students is not quite as high as minimum wage for adults. Those are things that you're going to want to make sure you're familiar with before you're hiring. And you know, proper breaks, safe working conditions, as we've mentioned. You cannot force them to work overtime without consent. And again, you have to comply with all of the Employment Standards Act and Occupational Safety, Health and Safety Act requirements, as you would have to with any employee. Next slide. With regards to the hours of work and overtime, that standard maximum week is 48 hours. As we've mentioned, if you have written agreement that allows you for them to work more, then that would be okay. But there is no overtime pay requirement for agriculture employees, including students. So again, you see those differences. Again, familiarizing yourself with the Employment Standards Act, you'll be able to, you know where you are and where those differences are, both from an agriculture employee point of view, as well as from a student point of view. We talked about the breaks already, and then daily and weekly rest periods must be observed again. just like you would have for any of your employees. One thing to note, especially if you're hiring summer students that might be high school students and only available for 8 to 10 weeks over the summer. Agriculture employees who work less than 13 weeks do not qualify for termination notice, but if they're working more than 13 weeks of continuous work, they are entitled to that. So you would want to, pay attention to that as far as the amount of time that you're going to have this student working with you. Next slide. Employment contracts. This is an interesting topic because I think, just like you should have an employment contract for any employee, regardless of their role or if they're a student or not. I think sometimes when we're hiring students, we don't necessarily consider making their employment as formal as having a contract. I think there's a few reasons that this is really important. For one, and it's not listed here, but for many times, this is the student's first foray into formal employment. This is their first time having a real job. And so providing them with that professional approach and those good HR best practices, and having them have a contract, I think helps formalize the employment, but it also helps them understand that they have a responsibility in this as well, and they're making a commitment to this job. So there's that, but there's also, it helps you really give those clear expectations. So that contract would outline what you as an employer are going to do and what is expected of the employee. It also helps with misunderstandings, especially around roles, wages, and conditions. And legally, it protects you in outlining those responsibilities and rights. The employment contract does not have to be, a very lengthy contract. I've seen them, pretty much on one piece of paper, but just including some key elements like the job title, the description, the work schedule, which, can be very important, especially for a student that is coming into a job for their first time. um, Compensation details, things about, what's their hourly rate of pay? What does overtime look like? What's the pay schedule? Are they going to be paid every 2 weeks? Are they going to be paid weekly? That kind of thing is really helpful for them to be told up front so that they're very clear and know what to expect. Health and safety obligations, again, what are the safety training requirements, PPE provisions, and things like that. Code of conduct, again, we shouldn't be expecting that a student would really understand code of conduct in a professional workplace. And so taking the time to set those expectations up front really provides you with an opportunity to, if you do have an issue with any conduct, you can always go back and refer to the employment contract and talk about that as a way to solve the issue. If there is a need for a termination clause, again, if they're over that 13-week period, then that's clearly defined as well. Expectations like if they have vacation, if it's going to accrue, or if they have time in lieu, whatever you're doing in that respect is also very important. Next slide. So one of the biggest mistakes that happen is not putting this agreement in writing. I know it's certainly the work I did when I was a kid. It was often, show up at this hour and we're going to do this and we're going to pay you cash or we'll pay you, every week, whatever it might be. There wasn't a lot of formality to it. I think at this point, there is a necessity to have things in writing and have that agreement. As I said, we can be and should be like plain language and simple, but have something that you do have in writing. And if you're leaving out things like key employment details, such as the work hours and the breaks, that can lead to some misunderstandings or, not being clear in what the expectations are. And it can also not make you as successful in ensuring that the policies around safety and discipline are understood as well. The best practices around these contracts is to keep a copy with yourself in an employee file and make sure that the employee also has a copy, signed copy as well. Review the contract with the employee to make sure there's clarity if they have any questions, and to have that signed contract on file in case you need it for future reference. Next slide. That contract really helps you set up clear expectations and kind of starts you off on a good footing with your student. And then taking time at the beginning to be very clear about the job duties, what the responsibilities are. It may seem, I mean, this is a good thing to do with any employee and should be done as good practice. But again, remind yourselves that these students are maybe, having their first job experience, and some of the things that we think which should come easily or naturally may not. And so having, some time with you as the employer to review the job duties, open up those lines of communication if they have questions, that's really going to help have a successful experience with your student. Keep the language simple. Again, these students, might be just in their first job. They may not be used to, work environments, and just keeping things simple, very direct, very clear communication is very helpful. That written job description and task list as a reference will help keep them on track, and encouraging students to ask questions, making sure that they feel comfortable to have that, to ask questions if they're unsure. That's really important, especially around safety issues. If they feel comfortable and know that you're there for questions and there's open communication, that's going to help them ask a question instead of maybe moving forward with something that is not best practice or a safe way of doing a task. Um, and students may not feel as comfortable asking an adult questions. They may feel like if they ask, they may be really uncertain or not have their confidence yet in the workplace. And so it may take a little bit of extra effort from an employer point of view to open up those lines of communication and make them feel comfortable. But it will be worth the effort, because they will, you'll probably avoid accidents. You'll avoid students feeling like they're unsure about what they're doing, and you'll ensure that their experience is good and that you have a productive employee as well. Next slide. So these are some, good examples of questions that you can ask to help set those expectations and help set up that clear communication. Do you understand the steps for this task? Would you like me to demonstrate it again? No problem. I don't mind demonstrating it again. Do you have any concerns? What do you think is the best approach in handling this situation? Again, helps them develop their skills, helps them feel more comfortable, and ensure that they know that they can come to you with questions, or they can say, no, I am not really sure. I do need you to demonstrate that again, or could you just go through that one more time so I make sure I do it right? Examples of clear instruction phrases are things like, at the start of your shift, check in with your supervisor to confirm you have assigned tasks. If you're running if you have a time clock, I know with my kids as teenagers, when they first went into their jobs, learning to punch in, punch out. That, if you've been working for a while and used to that system, it's just part of your routine. But confirming that process with them maybe a few times. Did you punch in? Did you punch out? Whatever it might be. Making sure that you just kind of reaffirm that that needs to be done, that it becomes part of their routine. Um, you're responsible for watering and checking plants every 2 hours. Very clear. If you finish your task early, go to your supervisor and ask for your next assignment. Then they know what to do. If they finish something, they're not going to be standing around or on their phone maybe, or going to the lunchroom, whatever it might be. The expectation is, if you finish early, that you let your supervisor know, and you'll probably be assigned something else to do. And very important, if you have any issues or safety concerns, report them immediately to your supervisor. I'm sure Dean will talk a little bit about that importance as well, but it goes back to that line of communication and making sure that they feel comfortable. They're students, they're young people that may not have that much experience, and they may feel like if they see a safety concern, they don't really know what to do with it. Or they may feel like they might get in trouble and if they report it, or they might be in trouble if they're reporting uh, a, a colleague that is, causing them some safety concern. Oh, being very clear about what those steps are, being very clear about that comfort level of communication is going to really help with that as well. Next slide. And training really matters for all employees. It's a really good way to ensure that you're developing your staff, no matter who they are or what their role is on the farm or in your agriculture operation. But it really matters, especially for the younger folks, because um, providing that little bit of training will reduce the mistakes, it'll improve safety, and you'll be more productive. It will also help ensure that they feel more confident and they'll feel valued. And maybe they're going to come back next summer and the summer after and continue to build their skills. Um, and no matter what, the skills that they develop while they're with you will be taken forward into the workforce. It might not be with you next summer. It might be somewhere else, but they're going to be very valuable work skills that they're going to have forever. And so it's very important to take that time to train. Sometimes it can feel a little bit, you might question the value of taking that time. Maybe they're only there with you for 8 weeks, or maybe they're only there for 4 weeks for harvest or whatever it might be. But making sure that you have training that at least provides them with some introductory skills, some proper methods of whatever the work is that they're doing is going to go a long ways for you and for them. Uh, some topics that you can consider is just an introduction to the farm and its operations. You know, many of your students may have grown up on a farm. They might be used to the way a farm operates, but every firm operates a little bit differently, just like every restaurant operates a little differently. Every business operates a little differently. So, taking that time again to walk through how your firm operates, if you have standing operating procedures, where they can find them, what they should need to know from that, making sure that you have that, general overlay of how the farm works is very important. Health and safety training, obviously, very important as well. And I won't go into too much detail there because, again, Dean's going to be getting to that in a few moments. Next slide. On-the-job training is a great way for students, keeps them engaged. You can see that they're learning. We do have an on-the-job training e-learning for trainers or for employers that you can take if you're wondering how to do that effectively. But it really helps you engage with the student and make sure that you can see that they're learning and that they're demonstrate the task so you can see that the information you're sharing with them is translating into them understanding it and knowing how to do the work. It also helps you open up those lines of communication as well and build that relationship with the student. Again, back to communication, but where the student feels like they can ask you questions if they have an issue or if they're not sure of something. Next slide. So again, like you would do with any employee, you do want to make sure you do that effective onboarding. We've covered some of these thoughts already in what I've said in the previous slides, but making sure when the student arrives for their first day that there is someone assigned to welcome them, you give them a tour of the farm and the facilities, that they're introduced to the other people working on the farm. It may be just a few of you, it might be all family, but it doesn't matter. just taking some time to make those introductions so they know who's who, they know who to go to ask a question about a certain thing. That can really make them feel more comfortable. And chances are, as students, they're probably going to be a little bit nervous on their first day, like most of us are on a first day of work, but maybe a little bit more. So again, you just want to make sure that you're opening up with some, making them feel comfortable, I guess, from day one. Also, on that first day, just taking the time to review the job expectations, the work schedule responsibilities, and the performance expectations, providing that necessary training as we've talked about, and then making sure that they have someone that is a mentor or supervisor. You might have a small firm and it may be you that's the supervisor. That's great. Let them know that, come see me. If you can't get a hold of me, maybe whatever your form of communication is, if you're not always with the student, send me a text, give me a call, whatever it might be. Or if they have a supervisor, making sure that it's very clear who their supervisor is and making sure the supervisor understands their role and responsibility in managing the student as well. And then checking in. We always want to do that with all our employees. Students, maybe you want to check in a little bit more regularly, especially at the beginning, just to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, making sure that you haven't missed anything in the onboarding or the training, addressing any concerns that they might have as well. Next slide. And then with that hands-on training, it does work a little bit better with students and make sure that you're engaging them. And so you want to make sure that that you take the time to do that. You might want to provide them with checklists as well so that they can, if you have a certain task that they're doing daily, if they have a checklist to go through, they're not going to miss anything. Maybe they're doing that checklist every day so that, they're very clear on what those expectations are and nothing's missed. Demonstrating the task, explaining the key details of it, allowing them to practice, and then giving them immediate feedback. So if you see them during their practice time doing something that you think needs to be corrected or could be done a little bit differently, just constructively providing them that feedback so that those mistakes are corrected right from the very beginning. And examples, you might be teaching milking methods. You might be demonstrating how to use farm tools. It might be a health and safety demonstration around preventing injuries. Next slide. We've talked a little bit about this already, but really that supervision is key. These are young people that have not necessarily have a lot of work experience behind them. So making sure that they are supervised supports their development, ensures they're being productive, and also ensures that safety and quality of work side of things. Excuse me. Effective supervision practices are things like assigning them a mentor or supervisor, excuse me, regularly checking in and having open communication. Next, next slide. Sorry about that. Sorry. All right, so creating a positive work environment, why it matters. Excuse me. You want these students to have a really good first experience in their workplace. And so creating that positive work environment is very important as well. You want to be doing that with all of your employees. And there's some very good, excuse me, examples of how to do that.
Do you need a second?
Yeah, I might need a second actually. It's very dry in our office, so.
That is totally fine. I mean, I can just say that my son, he works on a pig farm and he has since, I think it was October he started. And I find like that positive feedback too, just so that they know that they are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing at, how they expect it to be done, I think is also important. So giving that positive feedback just so they know that they are doing a good job is also important. Maybe we can go through There is a question in here just saying or asking, who are we getting permission from for working hours? And I don't know if either of you two have any, I don't know what, I'm not exactly sure what that means.
Great question. I think, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. My name is Rebecca Falston. I also work at CAHRC. So while Jen's figuring out the coughing situation, I'll jump in. Yeah, so I think the question was more around at the beginning, or one of the first few slides, they were that students need written permission if they're going over their hours. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure Jennifer will jump in just to make sure that I say that right. I believe it would be from their parent, especially if they're under 18, or maybe from their school, depending, like if it's a school situation. But I'll let Jennifer be the one to speak on that. But oh, she's coming back.
I'm back. I think I'm okay now. I've had a cold and then a dry environment. All right. Yeah, you know, I think it's that open communication with the student. You know, we want to have these students learn how to be professional and how to answer questions and take responsibility themselves. But in some cases, it may be that you have to connect with the parent. But you know, for the most part, you want to be dealing with the student as an employee, as you would any employee, and they learn that level of responsibility and communication as well.
Jennifer, can you just put your mic down?
Oh, sorry.
We could hear you. I just,
okay,
it
good.
wasn't
Yes.
as loud.
Yeah. Yeah. Next slide. And we're running a little bit along, so I do want to make sure that we give lots of time for Dean. So we'll just kind of go through these next slides a little bit more quickly, but we've talked about this, you know, with any employee, you want to be addressing those workplace challenges, but with youth, you may see things like, you know, they just don't understand the importance of arriving on time or absenteeism and the impact that that might have. So providing that feedback, providing those expectations, you know, sharing what happens, you know, if they are late, how it impacts your work, that kind of thing, I think is very important. You probably need a little bit more patience than you may with someone that has been in the workplace a little bit longer. But you know, having, I guess, going into it open-eyed that you may have to take some time to work around some different things with the students while they're learning kind of that work environment and expectation is important. Next slide. And then you also want to make sure that you do address the challenges when they come up. You know, you want to be making sure you're managing all your employees, but especially your students in a constructive way. And by doing this, it also helps them understand and learn what a work, you know, expectation is all about. And, you know, setting that attendance policies up front, being very clear about what that expectation is so that, you know, if you're having someone call in late, call in sick or not show up to work multiple days. And you know, you talk to them about it after it becomes a real issue. They may be just like, oh, I thought, you know, thought this was more casual. I thought I could come to work when I, you know, needed to or wanted to or didn't have something else on. These are things that, you know, you do have to kind of work through and make sure that you're very clear up front again, so that that expectation is set from the very beginning. It will really help mitigate a lot of these challenges that may come up. And then it will also help you refer back to conversations, expectations that were set at the very beginning when you're addressing a challenge. Next slide. There's lots of resources out there, as I said, to support the work, to support you. There's the AHRC toolkit, there's the ESA guide, lots of information available that we can share to this group as well. But take the time to do your homework and do some reading before you are hiring anyone, but particularly students, so that you know you have everything set and you know how to make sure you're organized in a way that's going to make it a really successful experience for yourself and for the student employee. Next slide. I will note that CAHRC does have wage subsidies if you're hiring students that are in post-secondary education, and our summer application process has just opened up, but we do have support for winter, summer, and fall terms. These are for students that are enrolled in post-secondary programs. Unfortunately, if they're not enrolled, it doesn't, it's government funded, and the guidelines for the program state that the students do have to be enrolled. And if you're looking at bringing students in that may not have agriculture experience and you're looking to do some e-learning with them, we also have some e-learning available online. It is a fee for service for the e-learning. It's a very nominal fee, and it could help provide them with some context to what Canadian agriculture is all about, give them a bit more information about what working on a farm is all about as well. And so that's it for me. Again, I apologize for my my little coughing fit there in the middle. Hopefully you found that helpful, and I will pass it over to Dean now.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I can go to the next slide. I guess I can introduce myself. I'm Dean Anderson. I'm currently retired, but I'm on the board for the Canadian Ag Safety Association. But I worked before that for almost 24 years for workplace and safety prevention in Ontario, which many may still be familiar as the old Farm Safety Association. So I've got quite a bit of experience historically working on it, and I do remember in high school working for my uncle on the dairy farm, and I'm not sure I had all of the benefits that Jennifer just went through. My uncle was my boss, and that's the way the job went. Not necessarily the best thing, but I loved working on the farm. So next slide. So new hires. Jennifer's done a pretty good job of going through all the legislative acts and requirements. I do recommend that if you are hiring, especially for the first time, go out and find, and the documents are available on the Ministry of Labor's website, or WSIB's website, or the Ministry of the Ministry of Labor for ESA also. Just go and look at the legislation, look at the requirements, those type of things. One of the things that Jennifer was talking about was keeping records. One of the things you can find on a lot of those websites, and I think OFA even has one on their site, and Workplace Safety Prevention does on theirs, are checklists that you can actually keep for that first day. Use that as part of your onboarding. Use that as part of your safety record. When you go through topics, write it on there, write the date. I can't stress more the last point on this slide, which is keeping a record of your training, the topics, the date, who, and then keep it somewhere. You should print off a record and give it to the student so they've got a record that you know you've done it. Basic things that have to be done. Any employer needs to do basic occupational health and safety awareness. It's a requirement. Farming is covered under Regulation 414, and this is specifically in there. It spells out the duties of the employer, the person who's supervising the work, which could be the employer, or it could be what we want to call a manager or a lead or something like that. And then the responsibilities of the worker. They all have responsibilities in the workplace. The Ministry of Labor has a designated health and safety entity, and for agriculture, it is the Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. They are out of Mississauga head office, but they have consultants across the country, and they have consultants who have been working in the sector for well over 20 years. So their first visit to your farm is usually not for fee, because they want to come out and see what you've got, and they can make a lot of recommendations, and they can assist you with training and those types of things, but they do have cost recovery. You need to make your workers aware of common workplace hazards. And I would say start with the worst ones that aren't involved in the workplace. So if you're on a pig farm or on a dairy farm and you've got liquid manure, talk to them about hydrogen sulfide with liquid manure. If you've got tower silos and you've got issues around silo gases, make them aware of those. If you've got confined spaces, not technically declared that in agriculture, but they're places that aren't really meant for people to be working in, you need to make them aware of those hazards and why they shouldn't go in them, because a lot of people don't understand when you say, no, don't go. You need to give a basic understanding of the Workplace Hazardous Material Information System, WHMIS. And that would be especially when they're working with certain items. So chlorines, acids, bases in the milk house, working with corrosive materials in the shops, anything like that. You need to make them aware of what they're working with, what the safety thing is. And you should make people aware of occupational illness, especially if it's things around molds and mildews and why you're requiring them to wear a dust mask. Hearing loss, protection from sun, all of those kind of things. So as I say, list those topics, go down through them on the first day, write them down, write them in your little spire-bound book that fits in your pocket on your shirt, put it somewhere, and then keep it as a record. That's your best evidence of training. And it also, if you have a checklist, it makes sure you follow through and you don't miss topics on your first day. So next slide. I was told this was about young workers, student workers. I want to impress on people that anyone is a new worker if they haven't done the task for like 12 months. And I'm just going to say, anyone with a combine knows that when they go to back the combine up for the first time in the fall, in harvest season, they're not driving it as proficiently as they did when they put the combine away in the fall. So you need to have that time to refamiliarize yourself with stuff. You may have changed equipment. So even if you're bringing back a person for a second year, you need to treat them as a new worker the first day on the farm. Tell them about things that have changed. Maybe the phone number has changed. Maybe you're making them work at a different farm. The fire code's different, so they need to be aware of it. And if it's a first-time worker, there's a lot more of those types of things that you need to make them aware of and keep going. And they may not be totally new to farming. You may be hiring a kid whose dad has a farm, but your farm's different. You drive a green tractor, not a red tractor. You've got Holsteins, they have Jerseys. They're a dairy farm and you're a pig farm. So you can't just assume that you've hired a farm kid and he knows everything, and or she knows everything. Basic points you need to do is that they're not aware of your operation. You make them aware of the dangers, your procedures, your policies. Again, Dad's farm is not the same as your operation. And one of the first things you need to do is let them know what the emergency procedures are in your farm. So if they have an incident or someone else has an incident and they're first on scene, they know what to do. Who's the first aider on your farm? Where are the first aid kits? What's the fire codes, or where can they find it quickly for the phone number? Does that person run to do the phone, or is there someone else that operates the phone? I know in bigger operations, say greenhouses, they would say you go to the front office, you get them to call the emergency services. Those types of things, those are spelled out first day. What's your basic points? And if they're working alone, you also need to make sure they know what to do when they're working alone. Gear, safety gear is another one I would call it a safety point. Do they require steel toes? Do they require boots? I would say never have open shoes on open toe shoes. What about gloves? If they're working with dusts, say you harvested for grain season or something, maybe they should have a dust mask. Hearing protection, always make sure they've got hearing protection. I would recommend no jewelry. I know that's not necessarily the case in all things, but especially if they're around any kind of moving equipment. Jewelry, loose clothing, the strings on hoodies. I actually would recommend just pulling the string right out of the hoodie. And loose hair are all things that could be hazardous around moving equipment. And people might not think of that up front, but those are things you need to be aware of. You should make sure that people understand if they're going to be lifting or constantly lifting, what safe lifting techniques are. Heat exposure, recognizing their symptoms in themselves or the person next to them. Sun exposure, dust exposure, noise exposure, and then supplying them with equipment or gear they need for that. So heat exposure, making sure they can take breaks, have access to shade, making sure they've got fresh water, cool water. Sun exposure, maybe you'll give them all a proper hat to start off the season with your farm logo on it. But keeping sun off the top of people's heads, A, keeps them cooler, B, keeps them from getting sunburnt and that kind of thing. So you need to make sure you do those types of things. So next slide. Tasks. Because you're hiring a student, they are probably coming from a situation where they're much like me, sitting in a chair all day long at school. So you need to make sure that you can, that the persons you're hiring, A, will be physically able to do the job, and mentally is sort of that part of it too. You need to work into it slow. And you should probably make sure that you don't just hire them the first day and have them mucking out a stall all day, because they're probably going to be completely worn out and phone you up the next day and say, I'm not coming back because I can't do it. I talk about being mentally able to do it. The other thing often with young people is that they can't keep up with a long task for a long period of time. They tend to daydream, those types of things. So that comes around the next point, which is when you train, demonstrate how to do it. It could be anything from that idea someone said about milking cows. So you're training them how to milk a cow properly, but then there's the safety around cows is all part of that training. Supervise, never leave them unattended for a long period of time. Leave them for 15 minutes, come back, make sure they're doing it right, come back half an hour later. Are they doing it right? If they're not, that's when you make the corrections to make sure they do the job right and they're doing it safely. Remember that young people, probably on their first day of the job, first week in the job, they want to satisfy everybody. They want to prove they can do it. That's just one of those things. Machismo kicks in. But you need to make sure they're doing the job mentally and physically to your satisfaction as the employer, to get the job done for extended periods of time. So that's all part of your quality control, is also part of your safety. It's all part of one. I think I got like one more slide here, so go. I know we want to get some questions. So next slide. So set expectations, limits, and rules. That's exactly the same thing that Jennifer was talking about when you start the job. Your expectation that we're going to start the job at this time of the day. I'm going to give you a break here. Well, the same thing for safety. Horseplay should never be allowed. There's a time and place for joking around, but someone's joking around on equipment or joking around when someone else is operating equipment. Someone walks into a stable and starts banging doors when someone's in around a horse, and the horse then jumps. It's horseplay just doesn't work well in the workplace. Establish your expectations around what you want them to do with a phone, without a phone. I don't like people wearing earbuds, because what it does is it blocks out noises around them. And actually the noise exposure from that can be worse than actually the noises around them too, because you turn it up louder than the noises around. Establish no-go zones. Working at heights, confined space entry, those types of things. Make sure they know where they're not supposed to go and why they're not supposed to go there. Vehicle movement, speed control. I was always told by my uncle I had one gear in a tractor and that was fast. But that's not always the best thing to do when riding a lawnmower. Distances from, say, open water, even slopes around roadways, hidden dangers, those types of things. I'm getting dry throat too, Jennifer. You need to make sure people are aware of that and monitor their use around equipment and movement of vehicles. Livestock is another big problem, and actually it's a number one problem that we actually have more females injured around livestock than males. Tends to be because we have a lot of horses in Ontario, but that's one of those things. But people need to know, never turn your back, never wrap a lead around your hand, always wear the proper footwear, no rapid movements. You have to always make sure that the animals we have on farms are animals of flight or fright. They're all herbivores, and they either run or they fight. And so if you scare them, and that should be light, it should be fight. But anyway, on the slide. But people walk into barns, don't know what they're doing, startle animals. The animal will either charge a person or will quickly try and run away. And if you're in the wrong place, you can get run over by an animal. So especially if people haven't been around animals all their life, you need to make them aware of these types of things. So I'm going to, I think, basically cut it short. My last slide here, because I do want to answer some questions if there are any. I want to make a quick note about the Canadian Egg Safety Association. For anyone interested, their online courses actually will be free in the month of March because Canadian Egg Safety Week is starting next week and goes through to the 22nd. I know that Workplace Safety and Prevention Services also have an awful lot of good resources online. CASA has other things online too. The Federation has got some very good materials, including, say, a checklist type thing, those kind of things that you want. The Ministry of Labor Training and Skills Development, or Ministry of Labor, they've got actually a whole section in there on farming, and there's some guides to things. And OMAFRA have got a lot of good stuff too. So that'll be my plug for safety for those groups. And Jennifer, I'm going to hand it back. I don't know if I hand it back to you, but I'll hand it back to somebody.
Thanks, Dean. And thank you, Jennifer, for those great presentations. We do have some time for questions, but first I'd like to just quickly jump in and make a note that the enforcement landscape has changed for the agriculture sector in Ontario over the last 5 years or so. The Ministry of Labor has increased the number of inspectors, and mostly because of the pandemic, the farm workplaces are increasingly part of their inspection schedule. This is not a bad thing. We need to be able to provide safe and equitable workplaces for on farms. The ministry conducts annual safety enforcement campaigns. They used to be called blitzes on a range of issues, but pretty consistently over the years, new and young workers has always been part of those campaigns. And this is recognizing that new and young workers and students, including students, have particular needs regarding health and safety. But don't worry, as Dean mentioned, there are a lot of resources available for all sizes of employers. Both CAHRC and CASA and WSPS and the Ministry of Labor all provide excellent resources. Some of them are templates so that you can easily pull together some of this paperwork that is required or that is beneficial. So don't worry on that part. If you need help, it's available. And on that, Joanne, is there any questions in the chat? Oh, you're muted. Ah.
There is a question about how do you find students to hire? I know my family farm, they were looking to hire a student to do some milking, and it wasn't easy, but eventually it was word of mouth for them. But there are employment agencies out there, talking to your neighbors, maybe the local newspaper. I don't know if maybe the local county federation, some of the directors know, some young farm kids that are looking for employment that are local to your area. I don't know. Do you have any other recommendations, Pete, Jennifer, Dean?
Yeah, I would say those are great recommendations. Also, there's quite often like a local student employment office that you might have. Using, if your farm has a Facebook page or if you're part of Facebook community groups, sharing it there, getting the information out that way, I think is great. And if you're trying to reach outside your community, the Facebook groups, LinkedIn, even for student jobs can work sometimes. And using social media, Instagram, that type of thing, whatever you might have, is a great way to get the word of mouth out there. And someone in the chat saying using 4-H, yeah, another great thing. Just think of where the students are and where they may be looking for work. Sometimes high schools have a job board at their at the guidance counselor area, the guidance offices as well. So that can be good. But yeah, think of where the students may be.
Perfect. Do you have any info about the internship program in Guelph?
Is that the newly launched program through the University of Guelph?
I would imagine that's exactly what she's talking about.
Yeah, we don't have any information right here. I know that it just launched, but our agri-talent manager would probably have more information about that, and we could get that and share it.
I don't. Oh. Okay, someone's just commenting about how they found students. So local high school. Some high schools now have a new green industries program that attract kids with ag interest.
Yep. One thing I'll say too is when you're putting the job posting out, I often refer to this berry farm that's outside of Ottawa. Their job posting is excellent because it talks about the expectations of the job, like, and basic, simple things that, as you know, when you're doing it day to day, you don't think about, but basic things like our farm is located 20 minutes outside the city. There is no bus transportation here. The hours we pick strawberries starting early hours. Strawberries grow low to the ground. So, you know, if you're picking strawberries, you're going to be low to the ground for a good part of the day. We pick all 7 days a week. You know, like this type of information in the job posting, it doesn't have to be a page or anything like that, but little bits of information like that can also help set the expectation for students. And you may not, you know, again, I'll kind of refer to my son. He lived downtown and we were going to, I was like committed to driving him to work and that kind of thing. But, you know, if you're trying to connect with students that might not be really close to you, having that expectation of what you need your own transportation here. And this is kind of the hours that you're going to need to be here, I think is very important as well, because there might be people that can make that happen, but there might be people that can't, and it'll help you, again, be more successful in attracting the right students to work with you, and setting that expectation ahead of time is it helps with confusion, frustration by both parties, all that kind of stuff as well.
Perfect. I don't see anything else in the chat, but I will put a plug in for our Lunch and Learn on Monday. It will be shared in the same way as this one. So you'll get an email and it'll be on our social media channels. And it is focused on those students. So it's during March break. The students who are interested or their parents who are interested in learning this information or information for themselves, what to expect when their kid or their kid themselves, when they're going to be working on a farm. So that could be really great information. And if you have individuals working on your farm or you have individuals that are looking to work on your farm, it could be a good session for you to share with them. So share that with whoever you think could use the information. So I'm just going to go to the bottom and see. There is, I guess, is there a program or grant to hire students? I guess this is over and above the ones that are applying for post-secondary.
There's for next summer, there's the Ontario Summer Jobs Grant that you can apply for, but that application needs to go in, I think, it's either right before Christmas or early January. But that's a really good, it covers quite a bit of the wages. I would say that's probably the best one to look out for.
I believe there's one through AAFC as well, but I think it's about to close. But that one's to hire any students in an agriculture position. So check that one out too.
And Danielle put it in the chat, the link. So thanks, Danielle, for doing that. Seeing no other questions. Oh, wait a second. But we're at 1 o'clock on the dot. So this is perfect. Perfect timing, guys. And we'll let Pete get back to the farm show. And I'm sure all of you are busy as well. So I will let everyone go. And thank you so much for joining us. And again, we will have them as well on Monday. So really looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.